on discussing your addicted or recovering loved one. We ask that you do not gossip. This platform is open to learn new ways of dealing with addiction and recovery in healthy ways. You are probably filled with fear and anxiety and have many questions to ask. Please do not ask questions relating to your loved one in treatment with us. Those questions can be answered by their counselor. Please give this meeting a chance. We may not answer all your questions at once, but you will find that with regular attendance, you will understand more and discover that there is hope to live recovery from active addiction. You may hear laughter, you may see our tears. This is where we are just for today. We have found that living with addiction is frightening, and yet in time, we could eventually understand and accept this disease. We are here for ourselves, for our own recovery, sometimes irrespective of whether our loved one is in recovery or not. As addiction is a lengthy process, so too is recovery. We are unable to offer a quick fix or a miraculous solution. If you are like us, we needed to commit to our own recovery process and keep coming back in order for us to have found these solutions. We are unable to take responsibility for the decisions you make after hearing about what we have to say or what experiences we have had. This process teaches us to take responsibility for ourselves, our own actions to facilitate change. We are not here to directly change our loved ones. We have discovered that when we begin to do things differently, we heal, and our loved ones slowly begin to change. Most of this group's members are here because they see value in their own healing and own process of change. We have learned to stop blaming, to get honest, and to start communicating in an open, non-violent, non-threatening way. We truly understand what you're going through, and we are here to listen and to share. Please do the same. You should find that if you are prepared to listen, you may get some new ideas that will precipitate change. We ask that you refrain from all verbal, physical, and emotional abuse with your loved ones. We know that living with addiction is chaotic, but there is no healing if abuse continues from any party. Fundamentally, you are here to change yourselves and to stop behaviors that are no longer working for you. These are the only requirements to be part of this group. Confidentiality, and we ask that if you have had any alcohol or drugs within the last 12 hours, kindly do not speak on this platform. We believe it might be the chemicals talking and not you. Each meeting, the host will do a presentation, and you're welcome to be present with or without your video on. We allow space for questions before we close. Please raise your hand if you want to speak. We will limit this to 2 minutes per person. For longer chats, please use the chat room. We will answer questions pertaining to the topic shared on each meeting. We will now commence with our meeting, and we hope that you get some new ideas to help you to deal with your loved one's addiction.
Okay. Thank you so much, Shami. Welcome everyone. Welcome to the Tuesday meetings family support group. So this evening, what we thought we'd actually focus on is self-care. And in the last couple of weeks, we've been looking at so Shami had a presentation around how addiction and all our addicted loved ones we can experience trauma based on their actions and based on their behaviors as well. So this evening, what we thought would be lovely to actually then engage in is actually self-care, and actually looking at what self-care is and how important is self-care, especially when as a family of a loved one who is also in recovery, how important that is as well as family members to look after ourselves. So in a sense, a loved one's drug or alcohol addiction, caring for oneself is in order to care for someone else is really important. And so therefore would like to just this importance of it. And actually then we're going to be looking at, I have a few illustrations from the movie and also the book A Beautiful Boy. So the father's sort of interpretation of how he needed to actually look after himself before he actually had to look after. So next slide, please, Cheryl. So the first thing we're going to be looking at is self-care. So what is self-care? So in all essence, self-care is any activity that we do deliberately in order to take care of our mental, emotional, and physical. It's a simple concept, but often overlooked. So a good self-care is the key to improve mood and reduce anxiety. And importantly, a key to good and healthy relationships with oneself and others is really important when we look at self-care. And as well, self-care refuels us. It is all about considering our needs, knowing what we need in order to take care of ourselves and others as well. And importantly, to also notice that if we do not take enough care of our own selves, you won't be able to give or even be at a place where you're able to give care to your loved one. So, in all essence, if you don't take enough care of yourself, you won't be able and you won't be in a place to give to your loved one as well. So, learning to love and care for ourselves is one of the most challenging things we will ever do. However, it is very important and crucial for our own recovery as family members. And essentially, as well, having compassion, patience, and loving yourself is a cornerstone of any healthy relationship with yourself or with others as well. So, in essence, when we look at self care, we need to actually have compassion. We need to be patient and we need to actually love ourselves before we can actually seek to love our loved ones or even to take care of our loved ones. Next slide, please, Cheryl. So, in essence, then we also look at what isn't self care. So, it's very important to note as an example that self-care is basically a selfish act and you don't care about the other person or your loved one who is suffering or is in need of help. But essentially, self-care is actually not that. So self-care is something we cannot force ourselves to do. That's very important to note. As well, it's something we do not enjoy. We do not need to. So basically, something we do not enjoy doing. So it's not as well. So self-care is something that you do enjoy doing and you find pleasure because it actually helps alleviate any anxiety and it actually keeps you calm in yourself and in your ability to stay safe as an individual and calm and also able to interact with your loved one. So it is also, it's not something that takes from us. And that's an important thing to note because when we think about taking care of ourselves and actually doing what we from someone else, in essence, it's actually not that. We actually we're giving ourselves something so that we can give back to someone. And in a nutshell, we can't give from an empty cup. So basically, when we look at that, self-care is not a selfish act. And that's just a cornerstone of of it all. Self-care is not a selfish act. It's actually a way of living and it's a way of interacting in a healthily manner with yourself and also with your loved one as well. Next slide, please, Cheryl. So as well, so what I thought would be lovely to look at as well. So in essence, when we are, so we call this a state of emergency. So living in a state of emergency. So I thought it would be lovely to actually look at this as well. What does it mean to live in a state of emergency? And this is where as well, where our self-care actually gets thrown out the window and we don't consider it. Or we don't actually take into account that we do need to look after ourselves without having to actually give and give without getting anything back. So when we think of addiction, addiction is a way of taking over everything in its path. And for parents, spouse, and family members, even children of individuals struggling with addiction, it is natural to want to devote ourselves entirely to their care. As families, we become characterized by a kind of emotional and psychological constriction, where we may not feel free to express our authentic self for fear of triggering disaster. Genuine feelings are often hidden under strategies for keeping safe, like pleasing or withdrawing. We become organized around trying to manage the unmanageable disease of addiction, becoming remarkably inventive and trying everything we can to come up with to contain the problem and keep the family from blowing up. So in essence, the alarm bells in the system are constantly on a low hum, causing everyone to feel hypervigilant, ready to run for emotional or physical shelter, or to erect defenses at the first sign of trouble. So when we think about the state, living in a state of emergency, addiction is a constant living in a state of emergency, because there's always a problem, there's always trouble, and there's always something that has to come up where, as a family member, you need to drop everything and you need to actually run for this, to run for your loved one's care and make sure they don't hurt themselves or even hurt you as well. So in a sense, this is also a really destructive pattern when we look at the state of emergency or the addiction of a loved one. Every single day, every single hour, or even every single minute, there's always a worry. There's always something that is brewing in the background. And as a family member, you become uneasy, and it's so hard for you to even enjoy your own life, to even be happy in any achievement that you have as a family member, because every single time it's catering to your loved one's addiction, catering to the loved one who is in addiction, or actually also who is constantly seeking and seeking, but also not giving back as well. Next slide, please, Cheryl. So in this constant state of emergency, it can seem impossible to think of anything else. And moreover, it can feel counterintuitive to the point of absurdity. If we stop focusing on our children, spouses, or family members and start focusing on ourselves, that could be the moment we miss the opportunity we squander. Turning inward can feel hazardous as it takes us off course. Sometimes it can feel like a betrayal. And what's so important to note here as well is that our loved ones are so gifted in guilt tripping us. When they are in need, they expect you to drop everything. Whatever you are doing, to them it's not important enough because they are in the forefront of it all. They are important and you need to cater to them at all costs. And this, when you then look at taking time for yourself, it may feel like a betrayal. It may feel like you're rejecting them. It may feel like you don't care about them. And sometimes these are the words that our family members who are in active addiction use, or who are in treatment, and also sometimes who are working an active relapse as well. They may use these words to actually make us feel bad, as if we are not as if we as family members cannot be happy or are not entitled to looking after ourselves. So often we don't recognize the true dangers of this approach until our children, spouses, or family members are in treatment, and we are left to grapple with the thoughts and feelings that have gone unseen and unexpressed throughout the active addiction stage. Suddenly, our children, spouses, or family members are where we want them to be, and then instead of relief, we feel the overwhelming burden of having to rebuild our lives and family relationships after years of neglect, or need to still make everything about them even while they are in treatment. So important to note here as well. So in all aspects, when as a family member and you've been living in a state of emergency and you finally find the courage to actually get your loved one into treatment, this also what it indicates is that we might then, because everything has actually been centered around them, we lose ourselves, we lose our own way of living, and we lose what we loved and what we enjoyed doing.
So in essence, then we become so centered in their treatment process, what they're doing, what they need, and also easily manipulated, because that's what we've been living in. We've been living in the state of chaos, in the state of emergency constantly. And for them to not be in our midst and be in our surrounding, it's hard also, because now we need to look at ourselves. And this is important because as family members, it's not only about the family member that is an active addiction or that is in treatment. It's also about you. You are also important. Your life is also important. And what you do and what you love doing is very important. So it's important to actually look at this with an open mind and in a reflective way as well. And next slide, please, Cheryl. So in essence, when our children, spouses, or family members have an addiction, our world can begin to revolve around their needs, mood, and potential for treatment, and emotional challenges as well. As we are no longer living in a state of emergency and can now focus on our own healing process, often for the first time in years. So self-care is a vital part of restoring our own emotional well-being, helping ourselves rebuild our family relationships, and giving us a sense of inner tranquility. This can be difficult to take on, as we've gotten used to living in a state of emergency. So in a sense, dysfunction can feel normal as well. But also, if we've been living in a state of emergency and we've been living in chaos and been living in dysfunction, it feels strange to not have action in our lives. It feels strange to not have that chaos. So then we find it difficult to actually look at ourselves. And so therefore we would then passively turn into our loved ones in treatment, wanting to find out how they're doing. And if they're unhappy, we then insert ourselves in what is happening for them rather than having to look at ourselves. So we can actually then find a way to deflect even when our loved ones are in treatment. So in essence, ideally, self-care needed to begin before our children, our spouses, or family members went into treatment. Nonetheless, during their own treatment process, it is a critical time to start our own recovery journey and process the impact addiction has had and is having on our families, our sense of self, and also our own psychological health. So therefore, self-care is essential part of this process, and allowing ourselves to shift focus from our children, spouses, or family members' needs to our own, and giving ourselves a real chance to actually address these needs as well. And like I was saying before, we also matter as family members of any loved one who's in active addiction or is in treatment. Our life also matters. Our self-care matters. Our psychological well-being and psychological health actually also matters. Cheryl, please, the next slide. So then the disastrous results of actually ignoring self-care. So this is basically from a quote that I actually found, which was quite moving for me when I found it online. So in this essence, it just talks about like the disastrous results of ignoring self-care. So this particular anonymous person wrote, early on in my son's battle with addiction, I did not take care of myself. Not only was I completely consumed in my son's issues, I was addicted to his addiction. Al-Anon is spot on when they talk about the 3 C's. We did not cause our children or spouses or family members addiction. We cannot cure it, and we certainly can't control it. Only the person afflicted with the disease can do that. When we try to defy the logic, we end up spinning our wheels and making ourselves sick. We become the fallout from our children's addiction or family members' addiction. Whoever in your family is actually in active addiction or in treatment, fighting a battle that we cannot win. We're constantly fighting a battle that we can't win when we think that, you know what, we can defy the logic, that we end up spinning. We end up going in and out of this roller coaster, in and out of this chaos, and we become destructive ourselves as well. And in essence, we forget about taking care of ourselves while we are spinning and we are defying the logic. And when we think and when we feel like we've caused our loved one's addiction, and perhaps maybe thinking that we can cure it, or perhaps even thinking that we can control it as well. In a sense, trust me, I know, as this person writes, early on in my son's battle with addiction, I did not take care of myself. Not only was I completely consumed in my son's issues, I was addicted to his addiction. And it's really hard as a family member of a loved one who's in active addiction or also in treatment. It's hard to actually have these honest conversations with ourselves to say that I was probably also addicted to his addiction, because it kept you and it kept me in a state of emergency. I was always running around. I always had a job, in essence, when we think about it, because it's a full-time job that does not pay. When we are constantly getting addicted to their own addiction and getting addicted to solving their problems, getting addicted to actually helping them through their process whilst we lose ourselves. In this essence as well, he also writes, I put my son's well-being ahead of my own. His health and happiness were more important than mine. And this is an important note, thinking about the fact that someone else's health and happiness matters more than yours. It's quite a sad logic to think about. When we consider someone else's life much more important than yours, then we basically at our mercy, we become slaves to them, because that's what we think they need, and that's what we think we need to give them. And sometimes we need to actually say no and actually say yes to ourselves. Next slide, please, Cheryl. So as a father, my instinct, as he writes as well, as a father, my instinct told me to help him now, help myself later. I believe doing anything different would border on negligence. But that was the worst possible strategy, both for me and for the rest of my family. The results were a complete disaster. I found myself living in non-stop panic mode. I spent most of my waking hours worried, frustrated, and feelings of helplessness were my constant companion. I couldn't sleep. My life and relationships started to fall apart. My health suffered too. All of these things happened because my happiness and outlook on life were totally dependent on the choices and actions of my son. I was clueless. My world was complete chaos, and it lasted for several years. And as we see from this father, it basically, his world is upside down. His world is in complete chaos, and in actual fact, the feelings of helplessness, the feelings of frustration, the feelings of worry, constant worry, like he says, were actually a constant companion for him. And he lost himself in his son's addiction. The next slide, please, Cheryl. So when we look at it now, so in essence, when we think about self-care strategies, so in thinking about self-care strategies, these include the most important of all is to ask for help. So asking for help, we know that it's difficult to do. We know that it's difficult to engage with, and we know that it's difficult to actually ask someone else to help us with our own problems, and also to give over to other individuals or other professionals that are capable of helping our loved ones. So in essence, asking for help is very important. And also seeking professional help for yourself as well as a family member is vital. And this will help. And as we've seen in our last couple of presentations, and the presentation around detaching with love. So detach with love doesn't mean that you don't care about your loved one. It just means that you are needing to work on yourself, and you also understand that your own well-being is important. and in the exploration of codependency. And hopefully Cheryl will do a lovely presentation of codependency, where we do look at what codependency is and how it actually affects our relationships, and how it also keeps the relationship stagnant in our lives, and we stay in the state of emergency, and we stay in the state of chaos as well. So importantly, it is important to connect with peer support groups. So like Naranon, Al-Anon, and what I thought would be lovely as well to also look at, to actually include Alateen. So Alateen is basically in connection with support groups for teenagers, and teenagers where their parents are struggling with addiction or alcoholism. And this part of it is important because I think in so many instances, children become overlooked when their parents are also in active addiction. And I thought it would be really important to actually also look at this in terms of them looking after themselves as children, as teenagers that are growing. Because when we think about adult children of alcoholics or addicted loved ones, they get affected immensely later on in their lives. So therefore, them finding their own support groups and finding their own space to address their own difficulties and also to look after themselves is an important aspect of their lives, so that they grow up and they also learn to actually be healthy, functioning adults as they grow up as well. So another one is Tough Love. And that's another also support group that one or anyone in the support group right now can actually look at and actually be part of, because it's important. This is still you looking after yourself. This is still you needing strategies to actually help you through supporting your loved one as you support yourself as well. So as well, participating in family programs or groups like the Changes support group, family support group, that's an important one as well, to continuously engaging in it and continuously being part of it as well. And also to start learning. So start learning about the 12-step program, the disease of addiction, the 3 C's as well. So the aspect of you did not cause this. You did not cause the disease. You cannot cure it, and you cannot control it as well. So it's important to continuously help ourselves grow and learn and understand what we can and what we can't do, and what is within our means and what it's not, and when to give over to other professionals to assist and when to actually take a step back. So it's important as well to support your mind, body, and emotional health. So basically, we look at different aspects of supporting your mind and body and emotional health. So in essence, a huge part of it is to stop enabling. And this also encompasses setting healthy boundaries, as we looked at the presentation on boundaries, we looked at the presentation on detaching with love, so much more where we stop enabling as well. And also the other part of it is to practice self-compassion as family members. And a huge part of it is to look after yourself. And the guilt that you might feel when you say no, the guilt or shame or embarrassment of your loved one's addiction, part of it is you need to actually practice self-compassion, because in all essence, when our loved ones are addicted or are in active addiction or are in treatment, it becomes hard to find that. It becomes hard to actually be okay with the fact that sometimes we can't help them beyond a point and that we need to hand over. And a lot of it as well, we need to also engage in our own mental health. We need to engage in our own exercise. We need to engage in our own physical well-being as well. And all in all, we need to learn to refocus. We need to learn to refocus as family members, as hard as it might be, to not engage and enable and not set boundaries. We need to actually do these things. So in essence, so Cheryl likes using this analogy, and I thought it would be quite fitting to put it in the presentation. So in essence, to help illustrate how vital self-care is, I would like to use the analogy of an oxygen mask on an airplane. So before taking off, a flight attendant instructs you that you should put on your own oxygen mask on before trying to help others in an emergency. Why do you suppose that is? Because if you are not breathing properly, you won't be able to help anyone else. In the end, the whole group will suffer. So think of self-care as an oxygen mask. By giving yourself the love, attention, and respect you are entitled to, you get the oxygen you need to keep you breathing. This allows you to be in the best condition possible to assist your loved one when they need it. You will be able to think much more clearly and effectively, and your day-to-day life will improve exponentially. Next slide, please, Cheryl. So in all essence, so a quote from a book by David Sher from his book of Beautiful Boy, a father's journey through his son's addiction. I finally chose life for myself, and when I did, everything in my world started to improve, including my son. Taking care of myself was a game changer for everyone involved. I didn't stop caring about my son. I started caring about myself. I realized that when a person is addicted, they are not the only one who needs recovery. Because addiction is a family disease. I began my own therapy, went to support group meetings, read a bunch of self-help books, started eating healthier, and treated myself to a new bike so that I could exercise regularly. My self-care or recovery program was truly liberating, as he says. As a parent of a child going through addiction, figuring out that your life is the most important one in the equation is probably the most difficult thing you will ever have to do. Some parents never learn or accept this, that self-care should be the number one thing on the to-do list when they have a child that is struggling or a loved one that is struggling. It took a while, but I'm glad that I finally bought into the idea. I probably wouldn't be here today if I hadn't. If your child's addiction is having a negative impact on your life, do me a favor. Try taking better care of yourself. Make you the top priority in your life. And I highlighted these points because they're very important. As he says as well, make you the top priority in your life before you can be able to help someone else. Yes, it might sound selfish. It might even sound a little bit crazy, but it is. It takes. But take it from someone who was once extremely skeptical. It will change your life for the better, and you know what? You totally deserve it. And I think this is an important quote, and I wanted to actually include it in the presentation because from a father's perspective and from a father's journey through his son's addiction, and the movie is also, there's a movie as well about A Beautiful Boy. It's a lovely movie, and hopefully also you can be able to get the book and actually read it for yourself. It's a lovely abstract to actually look at and actually go through and experience what he had to experience. And as you also experience currently as loved ones who are actually battling with a loved one who is currently in active addiction or is in treatment at the moment, it is important for you to make yourself top priority before you make your loved one, before you can actually help your loved one as well. Next slide, please, Cheryl. So in summing up, when we take care of ourselves, we build strength to both
Thando comes back.
Sorry, Cheryl, we can't hear.
Able to hear me now?
Yeah, there you go.
Okay, I'll take over till Thando comes back. Summing up, when we take care of ourselves, we build strength to both tolerate what we can't change and change what we can. At the same time, as a calmer, happier person,
we will be contributing to an atmosphere that is conducive to the change we hope to see in our loved ones, and we'll be modeling healthy behaviors we wish for in our loved ones. I think if we back up with what Thando's just been saying, being in that constant state of emergency, it's really important to start building up strength, because without strength, we're not going to be able to stand up and grow, and particularly go in recovery. So incredibly important that if we calm and happier and we start making the changes, automatically our loved ones start mirroring those same changes. Okay, I'm going to stop the share and open for questions. If anybody would like to, please put your hand up and or type it in the chat box, and Thando's back.
Yes, thank you. Pick me out.
Okay, Thando, we're now going to answer questions. So I've just said if anybody would like to ask questions or to please raise their hands. I think it's such an important presentation that you've done, because I do think as family members, we don't consider. When I first walked into a support group meeting and these group of ladies were sitting around with a cup of tea and coffee and saying, okay, have a long bubble bath and take care of yourself, I thought, this is not why I'm here. I don't want to hear about bubble baths and reading books and going for long walks. Tell me how to fix this addict. And they kept saying the same thing. You're here to take care of yourself. You're here to get knowledge. You're here to understand, and you're here to deal with your stuff. It was alien for me. Mm. And now, and I'm sure a couple of family members on this platform are thinking, yeah, nice topic, but it's not important. But it's probably one of the most important things we have to do, because like the analogy of the oxygen mask, if we keel over, how do our loved ones get better? They need us strong. They need us functioning. And they need us to have those boundaries, to say no, and to, I think, stop the martyr, because many of us go through that martyr where my life's not important, his or her life is. But it's not that.
Mm-hmm. And I think
I agree. Sorry, Thando, I think it's such a, again, such a lovely presentation, important, like Cheryl, you're saying, I think it's that thing of being so consumed by the addiction, and it becomes the norm. So any concept around like self-care seems very foreign, and so I think it's such a difficult thing maybe to grapple with. And I think that highlights just how important it is, Thando. So I think like the presentation in itself, maybe many are sitting with difficulty around that, but it's so important.
And I think, with that, like a thought came to my mind, and wondering about, the family members that have joined us in the family group today. Like, how do they look after themselves? How are they taking care of themselves in their own health and mental health as well? Because that is an important aspect to actually keep you going, and keep you staying safe and staying healthy, because your well-being also matters. As much as our loved ones are in active addiction or are in treatment, we also need to look after ourselves. We are constantly looking after them, but no one looks after us, and that's important, to actually start taking a step back and actually thinking about, how do I actually take care of myself? Do I give myself enough love and care and support and time off and time out of any chaotic situation, so that I can come back with a refueled, body, mind, any kind of, physical well-being, even psychological well-being? Do I go see my own psychologist? Do I go to my support groups? And as family members, that is an important aspect to actually look at.
Yeah, and I see there's a comment here from Norma Humphrey. It says, hi, very interesting what was shared and discussed about giving our loved one a good example of self-care. I get worried that my loved one will be triggered. Okay.
Am I talking about my
Yeah, about me
happiness?
talking about my happiness and success as he feels left behind.
And I think that's the thing, Norma. You know, the really tricky thing is we are sitting with that guilt. You know, as family members, we struggle to be happy. Even, you know, we achieve anything and we feel bad. We're like, if I share this with my loved one and they're struggling, how will they react? Am I being selfish? Am I being uncaring? But in essence, actually, you being proud of you is also important. And I think, like we actually illustrated as well, with the father who actually experienced such turmoil in his life, where everything became about their loved one. He struggled to even look after himself because everything was about their loved one. Anything he had achieved, anything he actually had to be proud of, he had to put on the back seat because it was not an emergency, you know. And that's how we keep our loved ones sick, to be quite honest, because we are saying to them, oh, I can't share this with you because I'm scared of your reaction. But in essence, you also matter. You know, your success and happiness also matters.
I'd like to give a quote from the Tough Love program, which says, "What I say is my choice and my responsibility, and how my loved one hears it becomes their choice and their responsibility." So if we're sharing a success and they feel left behind, or they feel like the victim, or poor me, that's their choice and their responsibility. We don't have to soft coat it. We don't have to make it look nice and pretty. We don't really have to do anything other than I take responsibility for what I say. And I think most of us pussyfoot around them like we trip on eggshells. We don't want to rock the boat. We don't want to upset them. But our success should not be painful for somebody else. They've got some issues to work through. So I agree with Thando. They need to hear it. If I think you said it earlier, Thando. If we're too scared to say certain things, and we're always protecting their feelings, it almost becomes like they take us hostage.
Yes, exactly.
And I think it was also in your presentation, Thando, when you mentioned around, how constricting it is, walking on eggshells and you end up not being your authentic self, so I think even that, comes with it when you're holding back because you don't want to rock the boat, it robs you of actually sharing authentically. There's a comment from Nadia. It says, "Shoo, this is spot on for me right now. Thank you so much. This is probably the most important thing I'm learning after hearing. Tough times don't last, but tough people do. I'm learning we can only become tough through self-care and learning self-love. There's so much said about self-care, and it's a selfish thing when in reality it's the most important. Thank you so much. This was so powerful and a real hard one to put into practice." That's from Nadia.
Thank you so much, Nadia. Thank you. And I think, you find that when you are constantly, before I actually say this, in all essence, you can't give from an empty cup. And we can't. And it's very important to fill our cups up first before we attempt to actually fill someone else's cup up. And the thing is, we can't always be running on low fumes. We can't always be running on reserve, because we are the ones that get drained as loved ones. And then we struggle, and then we get sick, because also with emotional struggles, we also do get to, like, in essence, our physical well-being also gets compromised, and like we say, tough tough times don't last, but tough people do. And you become tough by saying no, and you become tough by actually saying, I'm also important. I also need love, and I also need to take care of myself, and it's really important. It's hard to practice, but it's actually worthwhile. it's worthwhile.
And I think, Thando, the question you asked earlier, I'm not sure if, anyone maybe wants to share
Yeah.
about, how currently, we practice self-care. So I think even that if someone has something to share around that, like how do you practice it in your life? What ideas do you have to share? It would also be nice to hear. In the meantime, Merle says, thank you, awesome presentation and info.
Thank you, Mo.